Xagiga, Perik Aleph, Mishnah Gimel. Our Mishnah begins with a very enigmatic statement. And it begins by telling us, Oylois ba'moed bois min hachulin. The Gemara in Xagiga tells us that this statement is chisore mechsera. It's actually lacking something. When Rabbi Yehuda Hanossi wrote the Mishnah, he wrote it in a very brief form. And in this one expression, there are two separate halachas. The Mishnah comes to tell us the following. Oylois ba'moed. A carbon oiler can be brought on chalamoed, meaning that a carbon oiler which it is not an obligation for me to bring, unlike an oilas ru'iyah, which when a person appears on the first day of Pesach, Shavuos, or Sukkot, he has a chiyuv to bring an oilas ru'iyah. We're not talking about that. That oiler can be brought on Yom Tov itself. But all other oilers, for instance, if a person during the year, as a free will offering, he makes a neder or a nadova to offer up a carbon oiler, that is not a chiyuv that's put upon him by the Torah. That's his own decision that he's decided he wants to bring a carbon oiler in the Beis HaMikdash. That can be brought on Chalamoid, but not on Yom Tov itself. Bo'os min hachulin. And all oilers, whether they're the type of oilers which the Torah has told you that you must bring on the first day Yom Tov, like an oiler su'iyah, or whether we're talking about a nadorim and nadovis which a person is obligated himself to bring, can only be brought from chulin money, can only be brought from non-sacred money, and not from money which is ma'aseh sheni. The rule is, kol davar shebachayva, anything which there is an obligation upon me to do, eino ba elo min hachulin, can only come from chulin money. You cannot use sacred money, you cannot use ma'aseh sheni money to fulfill an obligation which you have. You can only use chulin money. And that is what the Mishnah is coming to tell us here. That whether it's the oila su'iyah, or whether it's nadorim or nadovos which I have made an obligation upon myself to bring, you cannot use ma'aseh sheni money to bring that. What is ma'aseh sheni money? We've learned in the past that a farmer has certain obligations, certain tithes, to take from his produce. First he takes truma and gives that to the kohen. He takes ma'aseh rishon, a tenth of what's left, and he gives that to the Levi, and then he takes a further tenth of whatever's left, and that he takes to Yerushalayim to eat himself, or, if it's not convenient, he can be paid it onto money, he can redeem it onto money, he takes the money to Yerushalayim, and he spends that on food which he himself eats in Yerushalayim. That money cannot be used to satisfy his obligation when he comes to bringing a korban oila. The Mishnah continues and tells us, V'hashlomim min hamaseh. But shalmei simcha, the other korban that a person brought on Yom Tov, besides the oila su'iyah, besides the shalmei chagiga, all of which are chiyuvim, and which he cannot use ma'aseh sheni money, there is another korban shlomim called shalmei simcha, which a person brought. There is an obligation in the Torah, v'samachta b'chagecha, you shall rejoice on your Yom Tov. Ve'ein simcha ele b'basar. The only way we have simcha is by eating meat, and we're talking about basar shlomim here. If a person had nadorim and nadovos, if they had free will offerings which they had obligated themselves during the year to bring, they could bring those korbanos on Yom Tov and eat that meat as their shalmei simcha. There was no chiyuv to bring a separate korban in order to have shalmei simcha. Any korban you had to bring, whether it was your chagiga, whether it was nadorim or nadovos which you brought during the year, all of that was able to fulfill your obligation of eating basar shlomim on Yom Tov. If, however, a person had no other korban, he had finished his chagiga, he had not offered up any nadorim or nadovos, or he had and he was already finished, and he still wanted to eat basar shlomim to be mekayim the mitzvah of a samachta b'chagecha, then he brought shalmei simcha, a shlomim just for the purposes of eating basar shlomim on Yom Tov. That, says the Mishnah, could be brought even from ma'aseh money. Why? Because there was no obligation upon him to bring it. If a person had meat of shlomim from any other nadorim or nadovos, that would be sufficient. Since there's no obligation, therefore my rule of kol davar shebachayva el eino ba elo min hachulim doesn't apply, because this is not a davar shebachayva. So if a person decided he wanted to bring shalmei simcha, he could bring that even for ma'aseh sheni money. Mishnah continues by telling us Yom Tov Rishon shel Pesach. On the first day of the Yom Tov of Pesach, and we'll see in a minute why we picked Dafka Pesach, because the same halach applies even on the first day of Shavuos and on the first day of Sukkot. There's a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai say min hachulin. that you have to use chulin money in order to fulfill your obligation of Shalmei Chagiga. We know that not only is there an obligation to bring an oilas re'iyah on the first day of Yontif, there is also an obligation to bring Shalmei Chagiga, a korban shlomim. That, says Beis Shammai, must be brought from chulin money. Or Beis Hillel oimim, and Beis Hillel say, min hamasa, that you could use masa money to buy the korban necessary for your Shalmei Chagiga. What's going on here? Shall we have a rule called Davasha B'chayva Einoi Ba Ela Min HaChulin? If you have a chiyuv, which Shalmei Chagiga certainly is, you can only use chulin money. And the teretz is that both Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai will agree that the first korban, the first animal a person brings to be mekayim his mitzvah of Shalmei Chagiga, must indeed come from chulin. This whole machlokas in our Mishnah is not talking about that first korban. This whole machlokas in our Mishnah is talking about if somebody has a very large family or a very large entourage and they bring along all these people to eat the Chagiga, and one animal is not sufficient to satisfy all of these people, and he wants to bring a second animal or a third animal or a fourth animal, all as his Chagiga, that is where you have a machlokas Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, whether or not those supplementary animals can be even from Maaseh money, or they have to be from chulin. Everybody agrees, L'kula Alma, the first animal you bring as your korban chagiga must be from chulin. The whole machlokas relates only to the supplementary animals. If you didn't have sufficient in one animal to satisfy all the people that were with you, and you wanted to bring more korbanos, then that's the machlokas Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Why do we mention Dafka Yontov Shel Pesach? The Mishnah tells us Yom Tov Shel Pesach, whereas the same halacha applies whether it's the korban chagiga of Shavuos or Sukkot as well. The teretz is because by Pesach there's another korban chagiga involved. For the Yom Tov of Pesach we know that we need to bring a korban Pesach on Yud Dalet Nisan, Erev Pesach. And the halacha was that the korban Pesach was eaten on the night of Pesach, al hasoiva. It had to be eaten when a person was satisfied, not when they were ravenously hungry. If, under the circumstances, where a person had a very large family, and there would be insufficient basa, insufficient meat on one korban Pesach to satisfy everybody's hunger, all they would get was one small kazayis, then they bought another korban chagiga, called Chagigas Yud Dalet, Chagiga of the 14th. They would eat that korban chagiga first, and then they would have sufficient in one korban Pesach to eat it ala soiva, to eat it as their afters, to eat it as the last eating of the Seder on Pesach night. There was therefore no actual chiyuv to bring this Chagiga Yud Dalet, and in fact, if one had a small enough family, just the korban Pesach would suffice. The only time the Chagigas Yud Dalet was brought was when one had a large family, and the korban Pesach on its own would not suffice. Everybody agrees that that Chagigas Yud Dalet could be brought from Maaseh, because it wasn't a Davasha B'chayva. Therefore, our Mishnah Dafka says Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach to make us understand that it is only the Chagiga brought on the first day of Pesach that this halacha applies. But the Chagiga brought on Yud Dalet on Erev Pesach, that could be brought even from Maaseh. V'ad kan Mishnah Gimel.